From the very first moment a person opens a history textbook or sees a picturesque postcard of Venetian gondolas, they are fed a lie. Venice is presented as the romantic capital of the world and a marvel of medieval architecture. We're told that this stone megapolis, featuring marble palaces, cathedrals, squares, and columns, standing amidst a shifting, rotten swamp on the water, owes its existence to the genius of medieval builders and, most importantly, to wooden piles. Official science, with a slight smile, insists that millions of larch trunks were driven into the muddy, salty sludge and that a civilization was built atop this wooden raft. But set aside the emotion, engage cold logic and mathematics, and this beautiful fairy tale immediately crumbles. Historians insist that the piles have not decomposed for 1,000 years because they are in an oxygen-free environment and supposedly petrified. Any engineer, biologist, or even someone who has simply built a fence will tell you that wood in water is organic material, and organic material inevitably decays. Saltwater, bacteria, and microorganisms do not acknowledge the decrees of historians. Even if we briefly accept this absurd myth of eternal larch, a question arises that literally shatters the official chronology to dust: the question of resources and logistics. Take just one building as an example, the Basilica di Santa Maria della Salute. Official sources report, without a hint of embarrassment, that 1,156,657 wooden piles were driven for the foundation of this church. Reflect on that number. Over 1 million trunks. That's not just lumber, that's an entire forest. To obtain that amount of usable timber, enormous forested areas would have had to be destroyed. If we assume that about 300 to 400 adult, construction-worthy trees grow on 1 hectare, the foundation for a single church would have required clearing a forest of nearly 3,000 hectares. Now multiply that figure by all of Venice, by hundreds of palaces, thousands of homes, embankments, and bridges. Where did this forest grow? We're told it was brought from afar, from the Alps, Slovenia, and Croatia. Now imagine medieval logistics. No railways, no trucks, no modern cranes. How could millions of tons of wood have been transported over mountain roads to the sea using primitive carts? Each horse could only pull a limited weight. Thousands, tens of thousands of horses would have been needed. How would they be sustained? And who organized this unprecedented in scale operation? An operation comparable in complexity to a modern global corporation. We're convinced that all this was done by semi-literate people fleeing barbarians. This is no longer construction, it is logistical self-destruction. The problem of transportation pales in comparison to the technology of pile driving. Today, this is done by gigantic diesel hammers. How was it done then? Manually, with a pile driver, so the official version states. Let's calculate. To manually drive a single pile into viscous soil to the required depth, a team of strong men needs a minimum of 1 hour, or even more, given soil resistance and the need for alignment. There are 24 hours in a day. Even with round-the-clock work without breaks for sleep or food, one team would drive no more than 24 piles. For the foundation of just one church requiring over 1 million piles, one team would need over 114 years of continuous work. 114 years just for the foundation. Of course, thousands of teams were working, but where did they live on the rafts? Where did they go to satisfy their needs? Where did they get food? Venice is a city that, according to strict mathematics, could not have been built with the methods and within the timelines we are given. They try to convince us that refugees from the Roman Empire fleeing the Huns ran to a swamp and out of desperation erected a marble megalopolis that has stood for 1,000 years. This assertion absolutely collapses under scrutiny. A fundamental question arises. Why build in a swamp at all? Why create unbearable difficulties when solid ground is nearby? Building on water costs tens, if not hundreds of times more. It's economic suicide. No reasonable ruler would spend colossal resources to create an artificial island unless they possessed technologies that allowed them to do it quickly and with minimal costs. Perhaps the piles were not always there, or, more interestingly, is it not wood at all? Recent independent analyses of some building foundations have discovered a strange structure of materials. It's not quite wood and not quite stone. The material resembles geopolymer concrete, which ancient civilizations knew how to create and whose secret was either lost or intentionally concealed. However, official history stubbornly clings to the large version as if it were a life raft. If we admit that the foundation of Venice is high-tech artificial stone, or the result of a completely different civilization's work, the entire card house of chronology collapses. If you look at old engravings and maps, Venice appears fully completed in them. There are no images of gigantic construction sites where thousands of people are driving piles. The city simply stands as if it floated up from the water, or the water came to it later. This is where the most fascinating part begins, the theory that academic circles fear to discuss. What if Venice was not built on water? What if it is an antediluvian city that stood on dry land, but as a result of a global catastrophe, that very flood, or a powerful mud inundation, the water level rose and the ground floors were concealed beneath the water? This version instantly explains all the inconsistencies, the absence of forests that no one cut down, the absence of millions of workers with hammers, and most importantly, the strange doors leading directly into the water. Have you ever noticed those doors? Luxurious entrances, half submerged in water, approachable only by boat. We're told that's how it was designed. Seriously, a ceremonial entrance where muddy water splashes and rodents swim in? Architects of the past were aesthetes. They built with the golden ratio in mind. Building a main door into the water is an absurdity that clearly indicates that the water level changed and the city was submerged. We look at Venice and see romance when we should be seeing tragedy. We see the consequences of a planetary-scale catastrophe that was hidden from us by inventing a fairy tale about hard-working Italians and magical larch. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. We paused at the point where engineering common sense rejects the official myth of piles and logistics. This forces us to seek the answer to the main question. If Venice was not built as we are told, then what actually happened to it? The key to the puzzle lies on the surface, or rather at the water level. Look closely at any Venetian palace. What do you see? You see canals. We are explained that this is a unique system of streets, but look closer. Beneath the modern water level, you can see arches, window openings, and most significantly, luxurious ceremonial doors. Why build a house whose main entrance is not on solid ground, but half submerged in murky, dirty water? This entrance cannot be used normally. Water splashes into it, dampness penetrates, and to put it mildly, this corresponds neither to the notion of comfort nor to the high level of architecture that these buildings demonstrate. If this were planned as a waterside facade, the entrance would be placed on the upper floors, with beautiful water-protected moorings, but we see monumental palace doors that were clearly intended to open onto a flat paved square or street. These submerged entrances, just like the half-submerged windows of the lower floors, are not architectural refinements. They are silent testimonies to a global catastrophe. They scream that the ground level was once lower, and this city stood on dry land. The canals, along which gondolas glide, are not man-made water arteries dug by people in a swamp. More likely, they are former streets, squares, and avenues. The city was built as an ordinary land-based megalopolis, and then it was struck by a disaster that drastically and significantly raised the water level. Imagine a powerful cataclysm, perhaps occurring several centuries ago, that affected the entire planet. Sources speak of the Great Flood, but a mud inundation or a sharp, catastrophic change in sea level is more probable. As a result of this event, the lower levels of cities worldwide were covered by a layer of soil, or, as in the case of Venice, flooded. This theory explains why Venice has no real functional sewage system other than the lagoon itself. Venice, in its current form, is, from a sanitary perspective, a gigantic, thriving cesspool, which is unthinkable for a wealthy, proud, and cultured republic. We are convinced that all waste was simply dumped into the canals, and this did not lead to epidemics. That is absurd. However, if we accept the flooding theory, the picture changes. Before the catastrophe, when the city stood on dry land, there must have been a complex, developed system of drainage and sanitation, perhaps even utilizing tunnels and collectors, like in ancient Rome. These systems are naturally now deep underwater, waterlogged and silted up. They ceased to function after the streets became canals. Thus, the official Venice is merely the second and subsequent floors of a majestic antediluvian city. When the water came, the people who survived the catastrophe did not abandon their homes, they simply adapted. They bricked up the flooded windows, stopped using the lower doors, moved life to the upper levels, and began using the former streets as waterways. This was not an act of building from scratch, but an act of rescue and adaptation to a new, hostile environment. This also sheds light on the foundation mystery. If the city stood on solid ground, it did not need millions of wooden piles which would have rotted away in a few decades. It needed only an ordinary foundation.
But what do we actually see? During reconstructions and studies, it was discovered that beneath many buildings, instead of the expected chaotically driven wooden trunks, there are huge, monolithic slabs that look like a single structure. This does not resemble medieval technology. These slabs could either be part of the original high-tech foundation or created from that very geopolymer concrete, an artificial stone that is incredibly strong and durable. When the city was flooded, the ground beneath it became waterlogged and unstable, and the buildings began to subside. And this is where the wooden piles come into play. They were not the foundation from the beginning, but an attempt to reinforce already existing, subsiding structures. Later inhabitants, discovering that the houses were sinking into the softened ground, began driving trunks around and under the slabs to stabilize the structure. These piles became crutches for a dying giant, and the new owners, who rewrote history, simply declared these crutches the foundation of the city, thereby concealing the true origin and technologies. The official version rests on two pillars, the pile crutches and the legend of refugees who managed to create a logistical and engineering marvel out of nothing. But these architectural anomalies, submerged doors and strange foundations, suggest the opposite. We are looking at the ruins of a civilization that surpassed ours. If they could build on a solid, high-tech foundation on dry land, and this city was incredibly complex in terms of internal infrastructure, it means that the people who lived here possessed knowledge that is unavailable to us today. And this leads us to an even more intriguing question. What specific technologies did they use, and how could they create such colossal structures? And why was this knowledge erased from memory?
We have established that Venice could not have been built as we are told, and furthermore, there is compelling evidence that it was flooded. Now we need to understand what this city truly stands upon, if not millions of rotting wooden piles. When official science focuses on tales of heroic pile drivers, it overlooks or intentionally ignores far more significant and mysterious facts about the foundation of Venice. Beneath many buildings, especially the most ancient and monumental ones, what is found is not a cluster of disparate logs, but something entirely different. Monolithic slabs and blocks of enormous size, whose structure and strength do not correspond to the medieval level of development. These slabs, in some cases, are not simply natural stone, but an artificial material. This refers to the possible use of geopolymer concrete, a high-tech cementing compound that ancient civilizations, such as the Romans or even earlier ones, knew how to create. This concrete possesses incredible durability. It can harden even underwater and withstand an aggressive salty environment for millennia. If the builders of 11th century Venice truly possessed the secret of geopolymer concrete, why would they need wooden piles, which compared to this material look like primitive toothpicks? The answer is simple: they wouldn't have needed them. Most likely, the original city was erected on a strong, technologically advanced foundation, perhaps on slabs of this very ancient superconcrete. When the city was flooded, this foundation began to subside into the waterlogged ground, and only then, as we have already discussed, did later inhabitants begin to drive wooden piles, attempting to stabilize the collapsing structures. Thus, the piles are not the foundation, but merely an attempt at repair. But the issue is not just the foundation. Look at the construction material of the above-water part itself. Venice is built entirely of Istrian stone, a dense, heavy limestone with low water absorption, which is critically important in the lagoon environment. And once again, we face a logistical nightmare. This stone was quarried on the Istrian Peninsula, modern Croatia, and transported across the entire Adriatic Sea. We are talking about millions of tons of stone. How could this colossal cargo have been transported in the Middle Ages using small wooden vessels? Multi-ton blocks and columns could not have been loaded onto sailboats without the risk of capsizing or sinking. This would have required a fleet that, in its scale and carrying capacity, would have surpassed the entire rest of the European merchant fleet of that time. Yet we are shown no convincing blueprints or descriptions of these gigantic transport operations.
Such large-scale transportation, along with the difficulty of pile driving and the absence of forests, leads us to a shocking conclusion. The city must have been built either at the site of the stone quarrying or by those who possessed technologies that allowed them to move enormous loads with incredible ease. Perhaps this involved knowledge of levitation, or the stone blocks were not transported but produced on-site using that same geopolymer concrete. That is, the builders did not haul finished stone but created it from local materials using a complex chemical formula. And finally, another greatest mystery related to materials: bricks. Venice, along with marble, abounds in brick buildings. We are told that these bricks were fired in kilns. To produce bricks in such quantity, suitable for building a megalopolis, required gigantic kilns capable of maintaining a temperature of at least 1,000 degrees Celsius. Where were these kilns located in a city supposedly built on a shifting swamp out of wood? Any large-scale brick production means smoke, soot, and most importantly, a huge fire risk for wooden structures. There is no archaeological evidence of such massive production centers either in Venice itself or on neighboring islands that could have supplied the city with billions of bricks. Furthermore, Venetian bricks possess a phenomenal resistance to salt water, not crumbling into sand over centuries, whereas modern brick degrades much faster in such conditions. This indicates that their production technology was either unique or lost. We, people who fly into space and created the most complex computers, cannot replicate masonry that was supposedly done in the 11th century. We cannot create a brick that will lie in salt water for 500 years and not disintegrate. This is not merely a story about construction, it is a narrative about a technological degradation. We are savages who settled in an abandoned high-tech palace, and now we do not understand how it works, inventing ridiculous stories about magical piles. Venice is physical evidence of a much more advanced civilization that preceded us, and whose knowledge was lost as a result of a global catastrophe. It is this lost technological level that allows us to move to the next part of our puzzle. If they possessed such materials and knew how to apply them, then what was happening in the very heart of their power, the famous Venetian arsenal?
Our investigation into the idea that Venice is not a medieval marvel but the ruins of an antediluvian, highly developed civilization leads us to the very heart of the old republic's power and industry, the Venetian arsenal. Officially, we are told that the arsenal was the first industrial manufactory in history, a sort of Henry Ford, where, thanks to brilliant organization of labor, ships were launched with incredible speed. Legends claim that thousands of workers toiled in the arsenal, and they could assemble a war galley in just one day.
Reflect on this. A fully armed, sail and oar-equipped warship built in the 15th, 16th centuries, an era of manual labor, primitive tools and sail rigging, was assembled in 24 hours. Today, even with all modern technologies, highly skilled teams and prefabrication, launching a comparable complex vessel in a day is practically impossible. This demands incredible coordination, a supernatural speed of material processing, and, most importantly, a technological level that, according to official chronology, should have appeared only 400 years later. The claim of assembling a galley in a day with 16,000 workers sounds not like a historical fact, but like a propaganda legend created to frighten enemies and exaggerate Venice's might. But what if the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and the arsenal really did demonstrate such incredible productivity, but for a completely different reason? There is a hypothesis that the arsenal was not a place for creating ships, but a place for their repair and maintenance. If we assume that the Venetians, or those who settled this city after the catastrophe, inherited a huge fleet and complex technology from the previous technologically advanced civilization, then the arsenal could have simply been a giant repair dock. Its true purpose was to quickly fix or relaunch the remaining equipment. In that case, in one day they could not build a galley, but replace a damaged module, repair an engine, perhaps based on some lost technology other than sail and oars, or simply change the rigging to make the vessel look like new. This transforms the arsenal from a primitive manufactory into a garage of the gods, a repair base for mechanisms whose secrets they were unknown to, but whose maintenance they could perform. It is this last technological level that links the arsenal with our previous topic, construction materials. We have already spoken of the phenomenal strength of Venetian bricks, capable of enduring centuries in salt water. Bricks in such quantity for construction would have required colossal kilns and a continuous supply of clay and fuel. Where were these kilns? They would have been a source of constant fire danger in a medieval city. The absence of archaeological evidence for such massive brick factories, as well as the incredible quality of the brick itself, confirms the theory that the construction materials were not produced artisanally, but created using lost industrial technologies. Perhaps in the arsenal itself, or nearby, there were not shipyards, but industrial workshops capable of producing not only parts for galleys, but also building blocks.
But the mystery of the arsenal and the materials pales before Venice's darkest and least discussed secret, the demographic enigma. After catastrophic contagions such as the Black Death, Europe lost a third to half of its population. It would be logical to expect economic and construction decline. However, in the chronology presented to us, the Renaissance flourishes immediately after the devastating contagions of the 15th century. And, most importantly, there is an explosive growth in Venice's construction, requiring millions of working hands. Where did so many people suddenly come from to populate these empty cities and accomplish impossible logistical and construction feats? This paradox generates the most shocking hypothesis. Venice, like many other European cities, was populated as part of a global reboot after the catastrophe. The cities were empty but intact, standing like gigantic stage sets. To relaunch civilization, a workforce was needed. Some researchers draw attention to strange symbols in Renaissance art, as well as paintings depicting infants.
This interpretation, although it seems like fantasy, suggests that the new rulers controlling the remnants of antediluvian technologies might have used certain incubators or systems for rapid population reproduction to quickly fill the empty cities with compliant and easily managed people. We may be descendants of those who were rebooted in the 15th, 16th centuries, people with short memories and a false history, who were persuaded that they were refugees or great builders. This theory does not just question the method of Venice's construction, it questions our very origin and the true age of civilization. The Venetian arsenal, with its unbelievable productivity and incomprehensible technologies, and the demographic paradox, are two sides of the same coin. Proof that what happened here was not just construction, but the adaptation and relaunch of civilization on the ruins of a world that was destroyed. But what kind of world was it, and what other mysterious fragments of former knowledge remain on the surface? This brings us to the final, most ominous secrets: sculptures, glass, and why Venice is singing. Our journey through Venice is a descent down the steps of official falsehood to the truth about a lost civilization. If the mysteries of the foundation, logistics, and industrial productivity, the arsenal, point to lost technologies, the final, most exquisite details of the city, its art and materials, are direct fragments of that more advanced era.
Venetian art and the technology of Murano glass are not just crafts, they are evidence of scientific knowledge. Murano, an island near Venice, became a monopolist in the production of mirror glass, the secret of which was guarded under penalty of severe consequence. We are told this was a commercial secret, but why? What was its unimaginable value? Murano masters might not have just been blowing vases, they might have been preserving the remnants of lost knowledge in optics. The production of perfectly clear lenses and mirrors with high reflectivity required not just skill, but precise control of chemical composition and temperature, knowledge that would have been logically impossible under medieval conditions. It is likely that these secrets were guarded not from competitors, but from those who might use them to restore the former, dangerous technological power. Even more astounding are the marble sculptures of Venice and the neighboring regions. Take, for example, famous sculptures where the marble looks like the finest transparent veil covering a body, or where the stone is worked into a minute, perfectly even mesh. To replicate this by hand, using only a chisel and hammer, is impossible. Any stone carver will say that marble is too fragile for such delicate work. It would shatter under the tool. This leads us to suggest that these masterpieces were not created by manual labor, but by high-precision automated methods. This could have been either 3D milling, controlled by complex software, or even more incredibly, marble casting. Admitting that these masterpieces are the result of a machine or an unknown casting process immediately refutes our pride in technological progress. It means that we did not evolve, but degraded to the level of primitive manual labor, while our predecessors possessed tools we can only dream of. Even Venice's symbolism holds hidden messages. The winged lion, the symbol of St. Mark, is not just a mythological animal. Upon detailed study of the ancient lion sculptures, they sometimes appear to be something biomechanical, and the alloy from which some ancient bronze statues are cast demonstrates such strength and homogeneity that it could only be achieved in modern vacuum furnaces. This again suggests that this is not merely art, but artifacts left by a civilization that freely operated with genetic engineering. Chimeras, dragons, griffins, in their understanding, might not have been fantasy, but species that existed before the catastrophe, and high-precision metallurgy. And all these fragments of knowledge, perfect bricks, the super-fast arsenal, sculptures of living marble, lead us to the darkest and most pertinent question: why is Venice sinking? The official version, which boils down to global warming and ground subsidence, does not provide a complete answer. If the city stands on a reliable antediluvian foundation, why is it submerging at such a threatening rate?
The most radical theory, which links all the facts together, states Venice is not sinking because it was built on a swamp, but because the mechanism that held it afloat stopped working.
What if the antediluvian civilization used anti-gravity or high-frequency vibrational technologies to hold its massive structures above water or stabilize them on shifting ground? These mysterious piles might not be supports, but grounding rods or electrodes that were part of a gigantic energy or stabilizing installation. When the global catastrophe occurred, whether a flood or a pole shift, this system failed, and the city began to slowly sink under its own weight. Venice is sinking because its external life support system is disconnected. This is what conceals the main danger. If this is true, then beneath Venice are not only flooded streets, but also the remains of high-tech installations. This also explains the strict prohibition on deep-sea diving and scuba diving in the city area. Any diver who descends deeper than permitted might discover that the walls of buildings do not stop 2-3 meters into the ground, but go down for tens of meters, and that they are connected to an incredibly complex metallic or stone infrastructure on the lagoon bed that has nothing to do with primitive wooden piles. We have been led to believe that we are the pinnacle of progress, but Venice is a monumental physical rebuke to our arrogance. We cannot replicate 11th century masonry. We cannot create a brick that will lie in salt water for 500 years. We are savages who settled in an abandoned high-tech palace, and now we do not understand how it works, inventing false stories to explain its existence. We look at Venice and think of romance, but we should be thinking about who lived here before us. Whose city is this really? They were erased, destroyed, and their homes were populated by us, small, compliant people with short memories. We were given fairy tales about piles and refugees so that we would never ask the main question. If they could build such a thing, then who demolished their civilization? This force that orchestrated the global reboot has not disappeared. It is simply watching us, and Venice is its eternal trophy, slowly slipping beneath the water. History comes alive when it's told. Subscribe. Discover what you've never heard before.